And welcome back to another episode of Coaching with the Bible. This is episode 160, season 3, episode 51. Portion of the week, the last portion, the 5 books of Moses, the portion known as 𝘧𝘢𝘪𝘵𝘩, also the holiday known as 𝘭𝑦𝑚 Atzeret, and Simchat Torah. It's a busy, busy weekend here on the Jewish calendar. And with this episode, we complete the third round, our third round together of the 5 books of Moses. 160 episodes, 160 weeks, week after week after week after week. Amazing thing to get through, and as always, I'm uber appreciative of having had the opportunity to do this and having had the opportunity to complete 3 full cycles with you here. I want to take the opportunity here also to thank those of you who listen on a consistent basis, those of you who read the intros either in WhatsApp or online, those who like the quotes, those who share comments and criticisms and critiques and ideas and sources and topics. I appreciate all of it, and I appreciate every single one of you. And I look forward to continuing to learn, to study, and to grow with you into the future. With that, our topic for the week on being an optimist. I took a quiz this week. You know, on occasion over the course of the 3 years together, when certain subjects come up, I look for a quiz, an online quiz. I'm always game for a quick quiz. I'm always curious to see whether or not I fit a certain category, what category my answers seem to fit when I fill them out. And so I took a quiz, and the quiz was a question of, are you an optimist or a pessimist? I don't know if you'd be surprised to know. Turns out I'm an optimist. I know, surprising. I think people, when they meet me or when they're in a first conversation or an early set of conversations before we get to know each other, I can come off sort of curmudgeonly and sort of grumpy. That's sort of my resting face, is sort of that grumpy look, maybe more than grumpy. But the reality of it is that underneath that exterior of sorts is actually an optimist. I'll qualify that in just a moment. And let me tell you what the test said when I finished and I got my results. Your result, a total optimist. Well, you certainly believe everything's going to come up roses. Nothing can set you back because you simply don't believe that it can. A wonderful attitude if you can sustain it, but we are just a little concerned that you might be setting yourself up for disappointment. If you really believe that nothing can go wrong, if something does, it could be a bit of a shock. You might want to just temper your optimism with a tiny bit of realism, then you'll be better able to cope if there is a crisis. But don't lose that essential optimism. I love that description. I thought it was hilarious. I could take the test a couple of times and come out with maybe a slightly different answer, but at my core, I think I'm very much actually an optimist. And the work that I have done over the course of many years sort of bears that out a little bit. Being in the rabbinate, being in education, having taught for a number of years, being in fundraising, and being in coaching, all have aspects of optimism required for success. I'm not sure I was necessarily a success in every single one of them, but to be successful in any one of those, sort of let's separate the reality of those things from my personal reality in those things, requires a level of optimism. You can imagine a teacher in a classroom who has no sense of optimism or positivity about the material that they're teaching, about education, about children. It's probably not a recipe for success. The same thing would go for a rabbi or any clergy member in a community that isn't optimistic about the future. You always hear in interviews with very well-known people, politicians, thinkers, philosophers, are they, optimistic about the future? And a lot of the time they'll tell you that they are optimistic about the future, but they just spent an hour sort of beating down what's going on in the world. Yet they're optimistic. So you have to sort of think about, what does it mean to be optimistic? What does it mean to be pessimistic? And what does it mean to be the third one, which is realistic? And are those things necessarily all independent of each other? Or can they sort of blend and mix a little bit with each other in the course of our own day and in our lives? It's a super important question. So let's take a minute here in the course of episode number 116 to talk about optimism. It comes up for me this week specifically because as we complete the cycle of holidays at this time of the year, of the new year, so the sort of the three-parted holiday season here of Rosh Hashanah, the new year, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the holiday of Sukkot, and now the last day, which is tomorrow, known as Shmini Atzeret, which is effectively called the 8th day, and it comes with the completion of the reading of the 5 books of Moses in the synagogues around the world over the course of a year, and the celebration of that, the joyous, very joyous celebration of that event. And so I was thinking back, and I was reading, and I was studying a little bit this week, and thinking about the idea that it had to have been that when God, let's say, chose the Jewish people, chose the people of Israel to be the chosen nation, that, let's put this in sort of human terms, God had a sense of optimism about what they can actually accomplish in the world. You could call it belief. I think belief and optimism go hand in hand. They're connected to each other. They're tied to each other. And God had a sense of optimism about what was possible. The people did as well. So when they say, we will do and we will listen at the foot of Mount Sinai, that comes with maybe some trepidation, maybe some concern, maybe some anxiety and some stress, but also comes with a confidence and an optimism that they can, in fact, do what is written in the book. They can, in fact, be the people of the book, the people of God, the chosen people. And even at moments when maybe Moses had some doubts about the people, or later on in the Bible when some of the prophets have their doubts about the people, there is a healthy sense and dose of optimism that comes their way that sort of cures them of that concern, and often comes from God. And so, whereas we've said before, in the words of Rabbi Sachs, where many occasions where it's not a question of whether or not God believes in, whether we believe in God, it's a question of whether God believes in us. Sorry, I got that wrong. It's not a question of whether God, we believe in God, it's a question of if we believe in us. And so if we believe in ourselves, we are optimistic sort of about the opportunity and the realities that are in front of us, then a lot can happen. By being optimistic, we essentially then get to a space where we can actually be opportunistic in the positive sense, meaning we can see opportunities and we can take them. So let's define terms for just a second here. So pessimism, sort of the negative side of this, is a mindset characterized by a negative outlook, expecting the worst, dwelling on problems and obstacles. Pessimists often see challenges as insurmountable and can be hesitant to take risks. I think we all know pessimists. Sometimes you'll call them Debbie Downers, people who are always looking for the negative in every moment. They're always looking for something that went wrong in those spaces. At the same time, the optimist is the mindset characterized by a positive outlook, expecting favorable outcomes and focusing on solutions and opportunities. Optimists are more likely to embrace challenges and view setbacks as opportunities for growth. There's that key word. So there's sort of like a line. So it just typically becomes a question that ultimately a person sort of deciding. It could be that by nature someone leans a certain way, that they lean optimistic or pessimistic. Or, let's say by nurture or their lived experience, the household they grew up in, that they may tend towards optimism or pessimism. And so the parental influence on this, according to the literature, is very powerful. Mentor, leader impact here is also very powerful. And so if you have a pessimistic boss, then you're not likely to get very far. You're not going to take on a lot of new opportunities or risks. And it's not going to be an enjoyable experience either. You're not going to look for opportunities to grow in that space. The flip side of that is if you have someone who's really optimistic, sort of very much has a very positive outlook about the future, has what you might call a Richard Branson type of approach. Richard Branson, the founder of Virgin Atlantic and Virgin Music and the Virgin Group and Virgin Galactic and all these different things. It's an enormously successful individual. I mean, insanely successful individual. And his basic philosophy is, screw it, let's do it. pardon the language, but screw it, let's do it is his attitude, which is the idea of we could research this, we could spend all day thinking about this, we could pick it apart, but let's just try it and see if it works. And let's have a belief, an optimistic perspective on this, that this could work, that if we put together the right team and the right resources, we put in the effort, maybe a little bit of luck comes our way and we sort of bump into it, that this could work out. It's a super optimistic approach to life. And a lot of people in the business community, in a lot of spaces in the world, probably viewed Branson as a kook, and probably still do, because he sort of goes against the trend and he bucks everything, and yet he's massively successful. He will admit, and I've heard interviews that he has given where he has talked about the failures that have come along the way as well, but those don't seem to stop him, or even massive obstacles don't seem to stop him. Go take a look at the story of him starting Virgin Atlantic, the airline, how that started, and how that story is so crazy, but it's very much born of this very positive, optimistic approach to the world, and it has led to enormous success. So there's a lot to thinking about where we are on the spectrum of pessimism versus optimism. But taking to heart the message from the test that I took, sort of sprinkling a dose of reality on top of that optimism, is very important. And the truth is, as much as I'm an optimist about a lot of things, I'm very much what I would call a realistic optimist. Can't always be optimistic. There are plenty of times and plenty of circumstances and plenty of situations where I've worked with someone and thought, yeah, this is going to be a disaster, and not simply just sort of taking an approach that I'm just going to be optimistic about this, even though everything pointed to impending doom in that project, in that situation. So certain leaders who I've worked with, who give off a vibe of real negativity, of a lack of focus or lack of effort, I wasn't going to sort of, put on rose-colored glasses and not be realistic about the prospects of success. I'm always going to be very honest about the prospects of success. However, when I have to think about choosing between where I'm going to lean and think about and focus, and it's maybe up in the air, I'll probably lean towards optimism versus pessimism on a lot of things. I may not always say it out loud, but I will do that. And I would say in some cases it's come back to bite me. There's no question that that's true. Certain people, or have had faith in or trust in certain people, or believed in certain people, been optimistic about the relationship, the potential relationship, and it's sort of gotten slapped back into my face. Yeah, that happens. Maybe you take a Reagan-esque approach, trust but verify, in these kinds of things. You can be optimistic but realistic, and that's sort of very similar in that sort of vein. So we think about this. We have to appreciate that the person who is the optimist is more likely, when we think about the benefits of being optimistic, is more likely to be healthier, happier, less stressed, having less anxiety, just overall, just more successful in life. And so it's an important sort of thing to appreciate the value that there is. And certainly in terms of work, as we talk about all the time here, there's no question that for your teams or for your peers or for your partners, that your being an optimist is going to more greatly benefit them than obviously you being a pessimist or you being sort of neutral on a lot of things. And so when you are actually more optimistic, you will make better decisions because you're going to be open to more ideas, and you may be more open to risk. And beyond that, you'll also bounce back from disappointments or failures more quickly because you're always generally optimistic. So when something sort of does get in your way, there is an obstacle or something blocks you or something stops you, or you're proven wrong, let's say with a thesis or theory or product design, whatever it may be, you're going to bounce back more quickly because you sort of tend towards optimism. Along that line, the people who are with you go along with you in that space. They'll borrow some of your optimism. Same way that I talked about with respect to confidence, borrow some of my confidence sometimes, so you can borrow some of my optimism as well in these kinds of spaces, because again, it is a choice that you make. When you're standing at the crossroad between being optimistic and pessimistic, either way, you're going to be right. It's just a question of which one you choose and how you then go about going down the path of either being the pessimist or the optimist. And I would tend to choose being optimistic. So in the daily sort of practice, how do we sort of do that? So I saw this great article, which I think is really worth sharing. This article is written by, I'll find it here, by Jason Selk. Jason Selk is self-defined as a mental toughness coach. He coaches athletes, he coaches individuals, he coaches businesses, he coaches teams. And he was actually the coach, he was a coach for the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team in the early 2000s. His job was to build an approach towards success for the team that hadn't won in many, many years. He was hired as a title as Director of Mental Training. It's like, whoever comes up with these titles, that's a great title. The Director of Mental Training for a baseball team. I would take that job in a minute. And so he says in the article, he focused on helping them learn how to set better goals, how to focus better on their priorities, how to stay positive, to be better disciplined, and ultimately to win. So basically, at its core, he was helping them learn how to cultivate a culture of optimism and confidence, which would then breed and lead to success. And so he focused on 7 things. We won't go through all 7 here, but he focused on 7 things. Great article. First, he focuses on solutions, not on problems. The pessimist, typically speaking, seeks out the problem and not the solution. They're not looking for the answer. They're looking to simply just highlight and amplify and magnify the problems that exist. And at a certain point, it is not just annoying, but it is detrimental and has negative impact on everyone that's around you. So to be optimistic is to focus on the solution to the problem that's being presented. So being solutions focused, immediately sort of jumping towards solutions, that's number 1. That gives you that sense of there's a solution here, I can find a solution, I have found the solutions before, I can find a solution again, and that begins to create what he calls the foundations of optimism. Number 2 is he talks about something he calls playing a 30-second movie of your daily life. So what he was working with the team is playing the movie every day, 30 seconds a day, with a reminder to do this exercise of your ideal life. What would you look like? How would you feel? Where would you live? What would you be doing? What would you have already accomplished? Who would you be doing it with? It's a very quick sort of exercise. And sort of this idea is a little bit of the manifesting idea, which you mentioned a couple of weeks ago, but it also helps you appreciate, as he writes, your potential. When you're creating that vision or that dream or that movie of your daily life, and you're seeing yourself looking a certain way, behaving a certain way, living a certain way, it's based in how you perceive your opportunities, but also the greater potential that exists within you that you have yet to reach, but it's there. And so it's not fiction. It's simply just not the reality at the moment. It's a future reality that you are creating. And so it's within you, and so you're creating, again, another foundation for optimism. Number 3 here, I think, is really important, which we've talked about before. It's minimizing obstacles to success. And so if there are people around you who are saboteurs, let's say, who are really pessimistic, who just drag you down, bring you down, take those people out of your situation. If there are things that are in your way or behaviors that are in your way, then it's upon you to figure out how to either minimize, reduce, uproot, remove these kinds of things that gets you a clearer, cleaner path to the success that you're trying to achieve. So the reason why that's important is because success breeds success, and success breeds optimism. In the same way that we talked about that the greatest motivator is doing, so the greatest sort of developer of your optimism would be incontrovertible proof, something I've said before, incontrovertible proof, data points that show already having success. And here, the last 2 I'll share with you. from his article. Number one, he has something that's called conjure up an inner coach. And so the idea that there's someone inside you who's cheering you on. A lot of the time, the negative talk that we have, and we've said this too before, and other people have said this as well. I'm not making this, it's not innovative here, but we're so much harder on ourselves on the inside than we are on the outside in terms of how we think about ourselves and how we talk to ourselves. The self-talk, brutal. But if we can also flip that over and develop an inner cheerleader or inner coach, someone who is inspiring us, who's pushing us, someone who is saying to us, you got this, you can do this, you've proven already that you can, then it actually helps you go forward. Or take a certain person that's out there in the world, someone who is motivating for you or is inspiring for you, and imagine that person being your coach. Have it in your mind. Think about them talking to you, cheering you on, giving you tips, motivating you, inspiring you, keeping you optimistic, keeping you focused on your goals. If you develop that inner coach, whether it's you yourself or somebody else inside you, again, not guilt and not embarrassment and not based on some sort of failure concern, but on success, so that's another way that really helps you build your optimism. And the last one here is to give yourself what he calls daily done wells. Get in the habit of recognizing, we talked about this many, many times, the very small things that you do today that were successes. It's not to say that it's going to be massive. It's going to be the small. You did that well. What did I do well today? What was good today? Did I pray well today? Maybe I ate well today. Maybe that exercise was good today. Maybe that meeting, a really important meeting that I went to with my team, I did that meeting well today. Did that much better than I did last time. Handled the agenda better, stayed focused on it, listened really intently to everybody, asked good questions. Eventually that builds. And so you're giving yourself consistent daily done well. So first of all, the compliment is good, the positivity is good, but also ultimately helps to build greater optimism. So this is how that works. So obviously the benefits are obvious to us, and being a more optimistic person is very, very beneficial to us in the long term. But also obviously tempering that with a little bit of realism, because you don't want it to get too high in the sky and too crazy and too out of reach. All bodes well for greater success in life. To finish it out, as always, with a quote. Here's a great quote from. I'll actually give you two quotes today, just because it's the end of the cycle. It's really important. So here's the first one. The first one is a quote from someone by the name of 𝘧𝘢𝘪𝘵𝘀. It's something that relates to what we said before. Both optimists and pessimists can be realists. They both can see problems. The difference is a pessimist believes that the problems are permanent and pervasive, and the optimist sees them as local and temporary. Very much in the space of what we talked about and focused in on. And here's the winner of the day. This is from Winston Churchill. An optimist sees opportunity in every danger. A pessimist sees danger in every opportunity. So seize the opportunities, seize the moments that are in front of you, seize the optimism, and seize the success that you are so deserving of. That is Coaching with the Bible for this week, the completion of the third cycle of the 5 books of Moses. Those of you celebrating this weekend, have a wonderful, wonderful holiday. See y'all soon.